Welcome to Claris Engage 2020 and my session on how to authenticate access to your solution with Microsoft Azure AD. My name is Ed McPike, Senior Solutions Architect for Trapollo, a Cox business company. I've been developing with FileMaker Pro and related products since 1996, first as an in-house developer, later as a consultant with my own company, and then back to being an in-house developer at Nat Geo and now Trapollo. Trapollo specializes in providing remote patient monitoring solutions for hospitals and insurance companies. Our core solution uses multiple files to handle call center workflows, support ticketing, and warehouse logistics. Internally, our employees access the solution with FileMaker Pro, but we also grant access to our external clients via FileMaker WebDirect so that they may place patient orders or device support tickets. In my over 2 decades of solving workplace problems for a wide variety of industries, one of the most important aspects that I've emphasized has been security. And since our core solution uses HIPAA data, security is of utmost importance. Using Azure for authentication has made our solution more secure. This session will show you how to set up Azure AD for your solution. But before I dive in, here's a quick outline of the steps I will cover. In this first chapter, I will discuss why you should strongly consider using Azure AD, then a quick preview of our solution setup. In the ensuing 3 chapters, I'll cover registering your application in Azure AD, configuring FileMaker Server to enable external authentication via Azure AD, creating and managing Azure Groups, and configuring your Claris FileMaker Solutions security to use the Azure AD groups that were set up. Finally, I'll review additional resources you can access for more details on the subject. So let's get started with the first chapter of our session. In this chapter, I will review the security benefits of using Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which I'll call Azure AD, as well as how much easier it will be to manage authentication to your solution. I will then review the demo file that is being used, letting you see the existing privilege sets to help set up the changes we'll need to make in order to add Azure Groups to your solution's security. Let's touch briefly on the security reasons for using Azure AD. Enabling and configuring Azure AD allows us to reduce the number of accounts using basic authentication to preferably just a full access account. Basic authentication uses passwords to authenticate, which is less secure than using OAuth, which uses tokens provided by an identity provider, or IDP. In this case, the IDP is Microsoft Azure. These tokens contain more information, such as what applications can use the token, group memberships, and when that token expires. Including the group memberships in the token allows Claris FileMaker to authenticate the user by group, rather than by individual user. As such, we only have to set up 1 entry per group in the FileMaker security module, instead of 1 entry per user. Azure AD also allows us to require multi-factor authentication, or MFA, adding another security factor, another way for the user to prove their identity via authentication code or similar mechanism. Not having to manage every user within your solution will save a lot of time, managing them from one central location, Azure AD, and not having to write scripts to create enable or disable accounts in multiple files will save you a lot of headaches. Let's take a quick peek at the file we'll be using for this demo. For simplicity, I selected the Claris FileMaker Starter template Assets as the demo file. As you can see, we haven't set up Azure yet, so all we have in the login dialog box is your basic account name and password authentication. If Azure were set up, the dialog box would be taller and includes a phrase "log in with" and the Microsoft logo below it. I'll log in with the full access account and take a peek at the security. Going to File, Manage, Security to open up that window. And you'll see we just have the admin account here that's full access. I've just added a password to it to make it more secure. We'll set up other users via Azure AD in the 3rd chapter of our session. Let's drill into the advanced settings to take a quick peek at the privilege sets. As you can see, I've left the 3 default privilege sets here, allowing us to create 3 matching Azure AD groups. Looking at the extended privilege sets, you can see that all 3 have been granted access to the solution via WebDirect, which uses the FM WebDirect extended privilege, but the read-only access has not been included for the Claris FileMaker Pro access, which uses the FM app extended privilege. Once we have Azure AD configured properly, we will come back into Managed Security in this solution and add the Azure Groups in a different authentication context. If we change the method of authentication, then select Microsoft Azure AD, we will see the Azure AD groups that have been granted access. Obviously, there are none now because we have not yet granted access. Claris provides a nice reminder here that the host is not set up from Microsoft Azure AD with the message not supported on the current host. We'll revisit again in Chapter 3 of this session when we have configured our Azure AD groups and are ready to enter the required information for each. But before I get to Azure AD groups, let's move on to Chapter 2, where I'll show you how to register your app and configure your FileMaker Server external authentication. In this second chapter of authenticating access to your solution with Microsoft Azure AD, I'll demonstrate how to get everything set up on the server side of your solution. I'll start by showing you how and where to register your app in Microsoft Azure AD. After getting your app created, I'll show you the changes that are required for authentication with your Claris FileMaker Pro solution, as well as other optional features. I'll review required changes to branding, authentication, and manifest. I'll then pop back over to the FileMaker Server admin console and show you how to fully enable your Microsoft Azure external authentication. We'll start in our FileMaker Server admin console so that we will be ready to capture some information from our server instance. You'll want to navigate to the Administration tab and then the External Authentication section. Click Change next to Microsoft, and the required fields that we need from Azure will be revealed. The Application ID, the Azure key, the Azure Directory ID. To set up the app, we'll need this URL in the gray field above. We'll replace your domain with the fully qualified domain name that you're using with your solution. For us, it will be fms66.fmhatrix.com. We'll copy the shown URL and then open your Azure AD instance. Once in your Azure Active Directory overview page, you can click on App Registrations in the menu on the left to see any you've already registered, or you can click this Create App Registration icon here to go ahead and create your next app registration. We'll go take a look at the list. As you can see, I do not have any owned and know all applications. From this screen, you would click New Registration at the top to create your new app. So we'll go ahead and click that now. It takes you to this screen where first we'll enter a name for the application. Be clear with your name so that it stands out for others. Our parent company, Cox Communications, has hundreds of apps, so we prefix ours with our company abbreviation and an app abbreviation so it looks like this, TRP_FM_. Then we have a different name for each server. For this session, we'll keep it simple and name it FMS for FM Server 66 Sandbox to match our server name and make our environment type clear. For supported account types, you'll probably want to leave the first type, single tenant. Unless you plan on opening your application up to outside users, which would make this a multi-tenant app. In that case, select the second option for users coming from their school or business. Or the third option to also include personal accounts. You can also choose the fourth option if your app is targeting only personal accounts. For more info, click on Help Me, choose. We're going to go ahead and stick with this first option for our app. For the redirect URI, we'll want to leave the type as web. Go ahead and paste in the URI that you copied from your FileMaker server. I've already gone ahead and added my fully qualified domain name to ours so that it's ready to go. And you can see the little green check mark there. Next, click Register in the bottom left corner. This takes us to the overview screen for our application. Two of the IDs you need to copy and paste back into the FileMaker Server admin console are right there. But we'll wait and do that after completing other required information. We'll be working in the Manage section on the left menu, starting with branding. This section has optional information. If you want to upload a logo, URL to terms of service, or URL to a privacy statement, you can do so here. Everything here is information for how your app would display within Microsoft Azure AD. So if your users are not accessing the system from an Azure app page, then you don't have to do anything here. If you're registering multiple apps, you may want to upload a logo so that they stand out in your list. You also change your app name in this section, which would basically be for your own clarity. It will not affect your FileMaker server configuration. Under Authentication, you will see the redirect URI that you entered while creating your app. If you have a multi-server configuration, you may consider adding a redirect URI for that server as well. If you're using FileMaker WebDirect, I would recommend adding a logout URL in case a logout occurs from Azure AD. We have a splash page in the WebDirect conf folder called logout that we use for our core solution. We also use a redirect URL from a landing splash page so that when a user logs out or times out, it lands on our logout page. In the implicit grant section, you want to check ID tokens. This is important. You already set the supported account types when you created the app, but you can change it here at any time if needed. Under Advanced Settings, your default client type can be left as No, being treated as a public client. Click Save at the top of the page. Next, we'll want to set up your client secret, which you'll need to add to your FileMaker server configuration. So let's click on Certificates and Secrets in the Manage section of the menu. You can skip the Certificates section and go straight to the Client Secrets section. Click New Client Secret in this section. A card window will appear asking for a description and the expiration duration for the secret. Name the key whatever you like. We'll name it FMS66. You can select any expiration period, but we recommend selecting Never. Then click Add. This is very important. The value of your new secret will appear in a new line. Click the double page icon to copy it, as you won't be able to retrieve it again later. Now return to your FileMaker Server Admin Console tab and paste this value into the Azure Key field. Let's go back and get your other IDs while we're here. Return to the overview screen of your Azure AD app, then copy the application ID by hovering over the value and clicking the duplicated page icon. Go back to your admin console and paste it into the Azure Application ID field. Let's return to the Azure AD app tab one more time to get our last value, your directory or tenant ID. Once again, hover over this double page icon to copy it. Switch back to the admin console and paste it into the Azure Directory ID field. Now click Save Authentication Settings to finalize your identity authentication settings. Next, let's enable database sign-in with the identity authentication you just set up. The external server account setting is probably disabled. Like this, click the switch to enable the setting. You'll see Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. Click on the switch next to Microsoft to enable it. Now your server is all set, but we still have to finish another task in your Azure AD app to ensure that we can authenticate with groups and not just users. So let's go back to the Azure AD tab. Click on Manifest in the Manage menu on the left. Here you'll see all of your settings in JSON format. This is the only place to edit the last setting we need. Around line 11, you'll see an object with the key Group Membership Claims. Its value defaults to null, but we need it to be security group with no spaces. So change the null value to security group in quotes. Now click Save at the top of the manifest. That's all there is to the server side of things. If you want to allow any other colleagues to maintain the app, you can add them as owners under the Owner menu item. Just click Add Owners in the upper left corner and add away. That concludes Chapter 2 of Authenticate Access to Your Solution with Microsoft Azure AD. Next, in Chapter 3, we'll review how to set up your Azure Groups for basic and B2B access. Welcome back to this session on authenticating access to your solution with Microsoft Azure AD. This is the third of 5 chapters. In this chapter, I'll start by reminding you of the privilege sets I set up in our solution, then demonstrate creating an Azure AD group, including all required information. I'll also create a second and third Azure AD group to match our other 2 privilege sets. I'll touch on external identities so that you can set that up for non-Azure using companies, including SAML and Web Services Federation. I'll introduce B2B authentication for external users that also have Azure as their IDP. And lastly, I'll modify our third Azure AD group to have its membership type be dynamic instead of assigned. You'll see how this could help you when inviting external users. Let's start in our demo solution by going into Manage Security, then Advanced, so we can see our privilege sets. Under Advanced Settings, you see I have the 3 default privilege sets: full access, data entry only, and read-only access. Read-only will be for external users, so we'll create a B2B group for that one. Let's head over to Azure AD to set up our matching groups. To create a new Microsoft Azure AD group, click on Groups and then New Group. You'll have 6 items to address on this screen. The group type should be set to security. If it is not, you'll need to change it. Select a group name. We're going to connect this to our full access account, so we'll call it Demo FMS Full Access. You can add a group description if you like, especially if others have access to your Azure AD tenant. Allowing Azure AD roles to be assigned to the group depends on whether or not you intend to use the group to access other areas. For this demo, we'll leave it as no. The membership type for a regular group should be left as assigned. You can wait to set up owners, as you'll still be able to edit this as an administrator. Owners are users that can modify the group moving forward. You'll need at least one, so you'll probably want to add yourself. We'll go ahead and add my account now, rather than come back later. To do so, click on No Owners Selected. select your owner, and then click Select at the bottom. Next, you can wait to add members, but since I'm here, I'll go ahead and add the only member I'm using for this demo, which is my account. To do so, click on No Members Selected. If you have a long list of objects to select, use the search field to filter it. We'll go ahead and pick my main account here, and then you click Select. The group is now ready to go, so you can click Create at the bottom of the screen. Once the group is created, you'll be taken to the Overview screen for the group. The object ID is what you'll need when you configure Azure AD in your Claris FileMaker Pro solution. If you need to add more members at any time, just click on Members, then Add Members. Here's Members from that Overview screen, and you can just click Add Members when ready to add. Let's go back to that Overview screen. Next, we'll go ahead and set up the other two groups that we need by clicking New Group and then putting in the same kind of information. To save time, I entered the information offline and created our second and third groups. You can see all three groups on this info page. I want to allow users from another company to access our system and use that third group. But to do so, I first need to enable that functionality. To do so, we'll go back to the dashboard for Active Directory, and then we'll go to External Identities, then External Collaboration Settings. First, let's look at Guest User Access. You'll probably want to make it as restrictive as possible, so select the third option. Next, under the Guest Invite Settings, allow admins and users in the Guest Inviter role to invite by leaving that as yes. Secondly, members can invite. You should probably leave on no, unless you want to expand that privilege. Guests can invite should be left at no. Leave the last two options as no, unless you want to share with users not in Azure. Lastly, look in the Collaboration Restrictions section. If you are sending invites to multiple domains, leave the first option checked. If only inviting known outside domains, use the last option. If inviting many domains, but want to deny some domains like personal email domains, use the second option. Selecting second or third option will make a field appear, which you can use to list your domains. Target domains here. As you can see, I've already added Trapollo.com to it. Then once finished, you would click Save at the top. Now let's go to the third group we created to show you a nifty option for adding outside users who use the same domain as I'm doing here. Once back on the Group Properties page, you'll have to click Save one more time to save the changes you've made to the group. You'll get this warning message to make sure you know that the membership might change. For instance, if you've already assigned members to this, by changing it to dynamic, those members will be removed and then the dynamic rules will be applied. So we'll click Yes to confirm that. Now we're ready to move on. If you'd like to allow other companies that do not use Azure to authenticate to your system, you'll have to enable external identities that match their system. I will give you a quick preview of that, though we won't be configuring any external identities as part of this demo. To set up Azure AD for other identity providers, we'll go back to the AD dashboard, go back into external identities like before, and this time we'll go to all identity providers. On this screen, you can add Google or Facebook, as well as SAML WS Federated IDPs for connecting to other companies. Let's quickly review the information needed for each. For Google, you'll need a client ID and client secret from the Google API. For Facebook, you'll need the same, a client ID and a client secret. But additionally, as this warning says, you'll have to make sure self-service sign-up for guest users has been enabled. You can also follow this link to learn about how to enable that self-service sign-up. For SAML and Web Services Federation IDPs, you'll need to select the IDP protocol here, SAML or WS Fed. You'll next enter the domain name of the federating IDP and select a method for populating metadata, parsing or inputting. We'll go back here and select SAML so you can see what happens. We've selected parse metadata file for SAML. So you'd have to browse for that metadata file by clicking there. You'd also have to get the issuer URI, the passive authentication endpoint, a certificate, and the metadata URL. If we were to do input metadata manually, we would just need those 4 fields: the issuer URI, passive authentication endpoint, certificate, and metadata URL. If we change this to WS Federated, you'll see these 4 fields change. You'll need for inputting metadata manually, you'll need an entity ID, a passive requester endpoint, a certificate, and metadata URL. For parsing metadata file, you'd still need, just like with SAML, those same 4 fields, but you would upload the metadata file here. For more information on these fields and these different ways of connecting to external identities, Microsoft has great documentation, which has been listed as a resource in Chapter 5 of this session. Once you have your desired external identities set up, you should be able to assign them to groups, as we previously mentioned, manually or dynamically. But you'll have to invite them to your system the same way, as I'll demonstrate in the next chapter. That concludes Chapter 3 of Authenticating Access to Your Solution with Microsoft Azure AD. Next, in Chapter 4, I'll show you how to finish configuring the Claris FileMaker solution to use the Microsoft Azure Groups we've set up. Then we'll invite a B2B collaboration user. In this 4th chapter of Authenticating Access to Your Solution with Microsoft Azure AD, I'll demonstrate how to finish configuring the Claris FileMaker solution to use the Microsoft Azure Groups we've set up, then invite a B2B collaboration user. The agenda will be to create those Azure AD groups in the FileMaker solution security, show a login with a non-B2B user using MFA, which is Multi-Factor Authentication, invite a B2B user and show what the invitation acceptance process looks like. I am back in our solution, where I'll show you what information to add to provide access to our solution from Azure AD Groups. You'll want to go to Manage, Security, then change the Authenticate Via filter from FileMaker File or External Server to Microsoft Azure AD. Since we haven't set any groups up yet, no users or groups are listed. Let's click New to start our first Azure AD group. You'll find that at the bottom of this bottom left corner of this window. New, it defaults to read-only access, but we're going to make it the full access account. Setting up an Azure AD user or group looks similar to the FileMaker user setup, except there isn't a password, only a user or a group name. As I mentioned in a previous chapter, it's much easier to manage groups of users with the same access restrictions than it is to manage individual users. So I'll click the group option for this account. As you see, the name of the field changed to group name and provided more info for what you need by showing object ID in parentheses. Since we need that ID, I'll switch over to our Azure Groups overview to get it. Over on our Azure AD Groups overview page, you'll see the list of our groups. There's no copy button next to the object ID, which is what we need. So you can either copy the object ID the old-fashioned way by highlighting it, then copying it, or you can just drill into the group you're going to be setting up in your solution, and then go next to the object ID and click the copy button. Now we'll switch back to FileMaker Pro and copy that ID into this group name. Lastly, I like to add the name of the Azure AD group into this description field since the ID isn't very readable. I'll go back and copy that. I'll get the other two groups set up. Then we'll see how the login dialog box has changed. Going back to Microsoft Azure AD, we need to invite users from the users list. So we'll go to the users section. At the top, you see new user and the new guest user buttons. We want to select new guest user to invite someone from another Microsoft Azure AD organization to access ours. This opens a form that should default to invite user. If create user is selected, change it to invite user. All you have to do on this screen is enter the user's full name, their email address, and their first and last name separately. Go ahead and add a personal message. I would describe the application that they are accessing. More than likely, the organization will already know that they're accessing your solution, so you probably just need to describe what accepting the access means. For my company's solution, we have a template set up to copy-paste to here from our solution's account setup page. You can also tap into Azure's API to push invitations here. In this session, I'll just demo the manual method. I've gone ahead and set up the other two group accounts. So here, you'll see all three. Each one is set up using the same steps, regardless of how they're accessing the system, via Azure AD with B2B, business to business, connection, or via other IDP that you set up with your Azure external identity settings, as we discussed in Chapter 3 of this session. I'll log out now and then go back in so that you can see the new dialog box. You'll see that there's now a Microsoft logo for your users to click to authenticate with their identity provider. I'll show you what that looks like. Just click the Microsoft logo. And if you've been logged in before like this, you'll get a list of accounts to select. Some people may be prompted to log in again, and with multi-factor authentication, they would have to enter a code or however they've set up their MFA. So I enter my password, and I am in. I've actually created a little tool in the data viewer here so that we can see our account name and group name. I have a JSON object for account name, a JSON object for group name, and you can see down here, group name actually has a value, and the account name is my email address. If it was a FileMaker Pro account, a normal security account, you would not have a group name with the function get account group name. Now let's log out and go invite one of our B2B users to our system. I've gone ahead and entered the info to save some time and use a message similar to my company's message. You'll have a little more info you can enter below if you like. If you didn't set up a dynamic group for this client, you can have their group there by clicking 0 groups selected. Then you could just choose the group that they need to be added to once they accept the invite. We will skip that part since we already have a dynamic group set up for Trapollo.com. You can also select a usage location or job info if so desired. I've picked the United States for me. And once completed, just click Invite. You'll be able to visit the user record later if you need to block their sign-in, so not really any need to touch that option upon creation. The user should see an email from your organization's Azure AD system. We'll take a look at that in just a moment, but for now we can drill into this user you just created, and you can see more information about it, such as whether or not they've accepted the invitation and whether or not they're blocked for sign-in, which could happen. This would say yes if they have had too many failed login attempts. Right up here under identity, you see that invitation has not been accepted. So if for some reason it went to their spam folder or they can't find it, you can always come here and click Resend Invitation. Let's go take a look at what that email invitation looked like. Here is the email that was received by my work account. As you can see, Microsoft already warns the user to be careful, as highlighted in that first paragraph. If your soon-to-be users are not aware that they'll be receiving this invitation, it may be alarming. So make sure you have made it clear to them what to expect. To access the solution, I just need to click Accept Invitation. This has opened a screen that will allow me to review the permissions I'm giving to this application. It says it is not shared by Microsoft and that the default directory wants to sign you in and read your name, email, address, and photo, and then gives you more warning details down below. I'm going to go ahead and click Accept. As you can see, it's communicating back to the FileMaker server. And now it needs me to go through our security verification. It asks me how I want to be verified when accessing this app, and I'm going to use our verification code. I have now added this to my mobile security app. So we're going to click Next again, and then get the one-time passcode from the app and enter it here. And now this user must use multi-factor authentication to access our solution. It will take them to that page we described in an earlier chapter, where it would list apps that they can access here. We did not set that up for them because we will have sent them the link already to access our app. Now let's go take a look at what that looks like. Let's check on the membership for this group. Please be aware, Microsoft states that it could take 24 hours for the membership to populate. In my experience, it's been almost instant. Here is our read-only group that was set up to be dynamic. If we click on Members, you'll see that my work account is now a member of this group. Here it is with the Trapollo.com email. Now let's go try to access the solution with that account. I'll now open the solution and log in with my Trapollo.com account to show you how easy it is to share with another organization. I'm going to pick this Trapollo account. I have my password and LastPass to make it easy. And voila, I'm in. This time I was not asked for multi-factor authentication because we just did that a little while ago, so that token is not expired. As you can see, I'm in. Let's take a quick look at the data viewer to see our account information. As you can see here, my account group name is that read-only access ID, and more importantly, my account name is Trapollo.com, has my Trapollo.com email address, which shows you that I've logged in with my B2B account. That concludes Chapter 4 of Authenticate Access to Your Solution with Microsoft Azure AD. In our upcoming last chapter, I'll show you resources you can use to review this information in more detail or review in-depth documentation. In this last chapter of Authenticate Access to Your Solution with Microsoft Azure AD, I'll quickly review some additional resources you can use to further your knowledge. Claris provides an in-depth security guide that you can review. You'll see expandable and searchable topics on best practices for configuring security options. Click Show All to expand the entire guide. If you drill into the security guide, you will find Enabling OAuth Identity Providers Authentication, which is the section relevant to this session. You will also find Editing OAuth Account Access. It is a topic in the Claris FileMaker Pro help document. There is a series of white papers available on fmforums.com. These white papers have been composed by Stephen Blackwell and Wim DeCourt. They are highly respected security and server experts in the Claris FileMaker community that have put a lot of time and effort into researching and expanding our OAuth, SAML, and federated options for using external authentication with the Claris FileMaker platform. Microsoft also provides extensive documentation for the things we've covered, starting with an overview of Azure AD. More specific documentation includes documentation of Azure AD Groups, B2B invitations, and direct federation. Lastly, here is a link to a paper that discusses OAuth 2.0 security best current practices. It's a bit tough on the eyes, but comes from the Internet Engineering Task Force. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about using Microsoft Azure AD to authenticate access to your solution. I hope you have found this session helpful. Feel free to contact me via email or the social media accounts listed with questions or comments. May your solutions all remain secure. I hope to see you soon at another Claris event.